Whistleblowers have worked with news media from the beginning of the Republic, and I hope continue to work with the news media and that the association is as successful as it can be. Our first speaker is Rich Bonin, a producer for 60 Minutes. We're extremely honored to have him here. For 22 years, he's been a producer at the award-winning show 60 Minutes. That show needs no introduction. It's a preeminent news magazine. He has won awards for journalism, including 5 Emmy Awards. He's covered a wide range of stories on terrorism, the Middle East, and exposés about government and corporate misconduct. He did an extensive show and an investigation on the botched FBI anthrax investigation concerning Stephen Hatfield. He worked on the case showing how the FBI pursued the wrong man in the Robert Hansen espionage case. He did extensive interviews and worked with Richard Clarke, the former top counterterrorism aide, in blowing the whistle on failures in the counterterrorism program. He's worked with corporate whistleblowers, including Chuck Hamill, in a campaign to silence him as he was blowing the whistle on oil companies. He's currently working on a book about Mr. Chalabi from Iraq, which is expected to be published next year by Doubleday. It's a true honor to have Mr. Bonin here, and I can tell you straight up that many, many whistleblowers that we've worked with have worked successfully with 60 Minutes, and it is a premier program, and we're truly honored to have him here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. So, as you heard, I've actually been at 60 Minutes since 1984, so it's about 25 years now. And the two things I've learned or see most consistently about whistleblowers in all those years is, one, that they're sometimes often difficult, gruff, persnickety kind of personalities, but you know that trait is precisely what makes them whistleblowers. They're not willing to go along or get along to go along. They're willing to buck the trend and speak out. And the other thing I've learned about whistleblowers is that almost always they're motivated by altruism. They want to act in a way that they see as in the public good or in the interest of national security, or to honor some higher principle that maybe the country stands for. And as I said, almost always that has been the personality trait that I've encountered. And one of the best examples of that is Dick Clark. He was President Bush's top counterterrorism advisor before, during, and after the 9/11 attacks. And as you all know, he was the guy who was telling everybody that bin Laden and al-Qaeda was targeting the U.S., and meanwhile the Bush administration wasn't taking it seriously. Paul Wolfowitz, Condi Rice, nobody was heeding his or George Tenet's calls to action, so to speak. And then Dick and I were talking about it as it was all unfolding, and it was all off the record, and I couldn't report it, but there came a time when he wanted to go public. He was, the dilemma for him was, when you work for the President of the United States, your loyalty is to the President. You are there to represent his interests, and that's something that Dick, like all executive office workers, take very seriously. But he felt this higher calling, that the administration was trying to blame Iraq for the 9/11 attacks in order to justify invading Iraq. And he didn't believe that, and he had to choose between his loyalty to the President and his sense of duty to the country. And I know he was motivated by a sense of duty, because I saw a high school yearbook that he wrote when he was a teenager, and he said, you know, may the seventh ring of hell be reserved for those who remain silent when it's their time to come forward. I mean, this was something that was central to Dick's character. And you know, the other thing he had to weigh is when you take on the president, and you take on the government, you are going to be dealing with a ferocious counterattack, political, personal, potentially legal. It's a real tough decision. And also in my experience, it's almost always, if you're motivated by this higher calling, it's almost always better to run into the spotlight, the glare of the news media, than remain in the shadows and just complaining about it internally. Because by going public, it inoculates you in many ways to retaliation. If it doesn't inoculate you from being fired, it can inoculate you, and often does, in terms of holding up your credibility and the quality of your character in the counterattacks that are going to come. And Dick had already made the decision to quit the White House, so he wasn't worried about losing his job, but credibility was a big issue. And so he came to us with, you know, unbelievable information. And Dick is a highly credible source, but as my colleagues will tell you, you never go to broadcast or print with just one source. You have to verify things, especially when you're taking on the president. And so one of the things Dick told us was that right after 9/11, the president pulled him into a little room on the side, outside the Oval Office. And, you know, Dick was already saying this is a signature al-Qaeda attack, and the president told Dick, no, Saddam, I want Saddam, give me Saddam. You know, Dick felt like the president was pressuring him to jerry-rig the investigation and the evidence so that they could pin it on Saddam. So now this is Dick in a private meeting with the president. Do you take Dick's word? Well, fortunately, there were several other people in the room, and we were able to get them to verify off camera Dick's version of events. So when we then interviewed Stephen Hadley for the piece, and he didn't exactly deny it. It was a classic non-denial denial. He said, well, there's no meeting, there's no record of such a meeting. I mean, that's not saying the meeting didn't occur. And, you know, and we told, Leslie Stahl is the correspondent I work with, and she, you know, in all honesty, ate him alive on that and a number of other things. And for the next week, Condoleezza Rice was saying publicly there's no record of such a meeting, and denying it, and attempting to attack Dick's credibility. And I think 5 to 7 days later, some of our confidential sources then decided to go forward and go public and say, yep, I was there, and Dick is telling the truth. And the point is, and right after our piece, which was a two-parter, so it was, you know, about 30 minutes, right, which is unusual in itself, but right after our piece, the 9/11 hearings occurred, and Dick followed up our piece with his testimony. And what he did is frame the debate. What he did was establish his credibility. I mean, one thing that TV news can often do very well is, you know, let the viewers look you in the eye. It's a tight 60-minute shot, and you can get a feel if this person is credible or not. So you were defining yourself before those whom you are attacking or criticizing are going to come out and attack you with all sorts of leaks and innuendo and what have you. And you know, and I know for a fact Dick did not regret for a minute going on 60 Minutes, and that it was a really smart move. So, so you know, to me that anecdote, you know, illustrates, you know, both the virtue of going public if you're a whistleblower. I mean, it's a very personal decision, and it's never going to be easy, but there are benefits to going public. It also demonstrates the values that the whistleblower weighs in him or herself. Duty to president, duty to the truth, to getting to a higher calling, you know, about the cause, what was behind 9/11. You know, and in many ways, the networks also face that same dilemma. Our sister broadcast, 60 Minutes 2, which is no longer on the air, when Abu Ghraib came to them, the Pentagon lobbied very heavily against that story being broadcast and made an argument that everyone in the news business and at CBS News and 60 Minutes cares about, and that is that that piece would inflame anti-American sentiments among the Iraqis and among the Al-Qaeda in Iraq characters, and that it could jeopardize soldiers. And that was a very compelling concern. And I think, you know, the broadcast molded over for a couple of weeks. And in the end, you have to weigh it against another duty, which is, I mean, here 60 Minutes 2 had documented evidence that some of our people were doing things that were so awful that even in times of war, they're prohibited by the rules of war. And so what do? It's a very tough decision that you weigh. And obviously in the end, for competitive reasons and for that reason, they went with the piece. I mean, there are instances where we've had really good stories that we haven't run because in the end, the government's argument may it may not be an Abu Ghraib situation. It's a nifty story, but running it may compromise something that the story in and of itself isn't worth doing, and that's happened to me, and we won't run with it. But in any event, those are to me the crux of the issues that whistleblowers and reporters alike have to grapple with, and I guess finally I would say, in terms of what we're looking for, are stories of consequence, that go to the heart of what we stand for as a country, or go to the heart of what an administration stands for, and whether there is an important level of hypocrisy or deceit that needs to be exposed. So that would be the extent of my remarks, and I pass it over to you.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.